Hi, David.
Hi, Lara. Agentic behavior.
Agentic behavior. This is like such a classy term, agentic. It
Yeah,
just
I guess
means
it is.
agents.
Yes. So the idea here is that you want your AI to be able to do long-running work. That's something we're still kind of struggling with. We talked about extending their time scale, the cognitive light cone of AI from a conversation up to multiple days. We're not really there yet. But there's a different aspect too, which is poor quality spiraling. And you see this a lot with people complaining about their AI agents and programming. Like they'll send it off to do a task. It will very quickly and glibly do that task, but it doesn't necessarily do it at a particularly high level of quality. Like the output looks good. So for example, you're like, build me websites. And a lot of the UI website builder AI products like Vercel and Lovable are famous for having this problem. You're like, give me a website, and they give you something that looks fantastic. But then as you start trying to evolve it, you're like, oh, this is amazing. It is like 90% of there. And then, the saying is like the first 90% takes, 90% of the time. And the second 10% takes the remaining 90% of the time. The math doesn't add, but the point is that the math doesn't add, right? It does a job that seems really good superficially, but because it's not that well built, when you start trying to make changes to it, stuff starts breaking, and then you just get into this spiral of test and fix. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And often if I'm outputting something that is unimportant to me, I have introduced a new question which didn't exist prior to LLMs doing writing for me, where I ask, is it worth it? So it might be worth it to change a word that I think is better, but maybe it's not, because if I change that one word, it's like pulling a thread. I start noticing, well, that doesn't make that sentence quite correct. So I change the sentence. And then once I've changed the sentence, maybe there's a word that repeats with the next sentence. And then it just becomes this like rabbit hole of editing, which I can't
it's like
let
pulling
go
the
of.
yarn, right? You're unraveling the sweater.
And sometimes I just go, I don't like that. And I go like, but it's fine. And then I let it be at 90% or 80%. I don't try to bring it to 100.
That's a very valid technique. Sometimes, especially with these prototyping tools, the problem is that you got to make that next set of changes. Like, it's 90% good isn't good enough, right? You actually have to go take it and productize it and make it talk to other systems and things like that.
Absolutely. I'm more saying I recognize that issue, and I think that is an issue that just repeats everywhere.
Yeah, it is. And so sometimes the answer is quit where your head, right?
But sometimes where your head is the right. It's just an email. It's not that deep.
Right, exactly. But sometimes it does have to go better. And so now what I realized is that we need to give AI more understanding of quality work. And I got a big breakthrough with this recently. Because it doesn't, the problem is, why did it produce poor quality work, right? Because it was aiming at the wrong target.
There's a teaching term for it. Exemplar. It's not an exemplar.
Yep. Yes, that's it exactly. So you haven't given a good definition of what quality is, and so it's focusing on meeting your requests. So for example, I ask for a mapping tool, it builds me a map. Actually, I asked it to give me some information about the demographics of North Texas. It overperforms in an awesome agentic way and builds me a mapping tool. And first I'm like, this is amazing. It is so good. It's just fantastic, because it way overperformed my expectation. So its goal was to meet my expectation. But then once you start modifying it, you realize that it's hard-coded all kinds of coordinates into the UI. So in this specific case, the coordinates of cities. And you can get away with that for the big cities, that it memorized the longitude of. But when you start asking it to smaller cities, it doesn't know those. So the method of answering those questions isn't robust. It's just like picking them out of memory is great if you remember stuff. But once you start asking about things it doesn't remember, it doesn't have a good way of doing that. And hard coding coordinates into the UI is not really a good engineering practice. You want to have your data in one place and your user interface in a different place so that you can change one without changing the other. So what I realized is I had to give it standards. And the standards that I gave it were basically around doing work in general. Like what does good work look like?
I just had the exact same issue, because standards are another word for metrics. Correct?
Well, metrics are more like numerical. They're numbers. So you can have like a non-numerical standard, like your code is well written.
Okay.
I think it means something. It's not precise.
No, I'm using a metric in the non-numerical sense.
Okay.
Because it's not true. But yeah,
so it's
okay.
really standard. Yeah.
But I had the same thing where I would have too many metrics being evaluated for a thing, but I could distill them easily down to one metric, one standard that would make the full decision for me. Because if that was there or not there, that would mean all these things were kind of irrelevant.
Okay, so give me an example.
I spend a lot of time evaluating my relationships, and I would use metrics like, well, in my interactions with these people and their effect on my life, did my life get better or worse? Did I feel better or worse about myself as a person? Are they doing their fair share? Am I expecting too much? I'd just get all in my head about it, and a lot of it would get moral, like are they exhibiting toxic relationship patterns or healthy ones, and all that kind of blah, 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 blah. And then I realized just the other day that the only metric that really matters to me is presence. And I can always tell like that if a person is present or not present. It registers in my somatic sense as they're not there. Like they're like a ghost. A lot of people aren't actually present in their own life. And so that causes a lot of harm. But I was going too far downstream in the morality of trying to figure out if harm would be caused by interacting with this person, by trying to decide if their intentions were good or bad or blah, blah, blah. But they could have great intentions, but if they're not present, they're just going to effectively run me over without noticing me. And that will cause just as much harm as if they're like got a target on my back. And so that is the only metric I really need to register. Is this person present, or do I have a sense that they're not there? And if I have a sense that they're not there, then I just don't fuck with them.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
And that's a lot of people. It's a very high bar, I gotta say.
Yes, indeed. So the overall theme here is quality. Like what do you consider to be quality? So what you did there is you kind of came up with a single measurement that tells you, is this quality or not?
Is this dangerous or not? Actually,
yeah, is it a high quality relationship, right? Is it a poor quality relationship?
Yeah.
So what I did with my AI agent is I got it to ask what the outcome should be, right? What target it's looking at, rather than assume from the request, because it's kind of geared towards like the user asked me to do something, I'll go off and do that, but it doesn't, like, what would a good human do? A good human would stop and say, what are you really trying to accomplish here?
As soon as there was any kind of like complication, like they're like, oh, I got you a thing. And you're like, oh, no, that's not really the thing I'm looking for. They're like, wait a second, what are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah, exactly.
So that the next time I get you a thing, it's useful. I'm not wasting my money.
Right, because that's why you bought the wrong thing, right?
Yeah, because I didn't understand what they were looking for.
Yeah, so you've got to understand the high-level goal, the high-level domain that you're working in. And so what I did is I gave it instructions to always ask that, like what specific outcomes does the user want to achieve? What's their desired end state? Do you have enough information to answer it? And should you clarify your requirements before proceeding? I have it start with that. When I start up the agent, it starts by reading those principles and reflecting on them, and then we start doing work. So I took a crappy blog post. I was working with this demographic explorer thing that turned into a product, actually. It turned into like an actual website from my question of like, how fast are cities in North Texas growing? Is there any data on that? It builds me a visualizer. We go into this whole spiral of improving the visualizer. In the middle of it, I realized this visualizer looks superficially impressive, but it's not built that well, and it doesn't hold up to changes because it wasn't trying to solve the problem of building a good visualizer. It was trying to answer my question in a flashy and impressive way. So I needed to shift the goalposts. So after I realized that, I gave it these instructions kind of on what quality work looked like. So now every time it starts up, it reflects on quality work. So at the end of the visualizer, I had it write a blog post. And the blog post is just terrible. It didn't really get the full scope of the project. It started in the middle because the context window had gotten rolled off. It had forgotten about the earlier stuff it did because it's a huge conversation. It wasn't geared towards the professional audience that I write for on LinkedIn. It was just generally too emotionally hooky. I'm like, this is not a blog post for TikTok. But I didn't tell it any of that, right? So the next time I started it, go ahead.
That's why exemplars are so important. I had this really great therapist in my 20s, and he said, if I say dog to a group of you, then everyone's going to think of a completely different dog. And the same would go for good. If you say good, everyone's going to think of a completely different, and no one's wrong, but they're all different.
So what I should have done is given it an exemplar But what I've now done is taught it to ask me for the exemplars.
Oh, how do you do that? That's interesting.
Yeah,
Ooh.
so I gave it this set of small
You're
instructions.
such a professor.
It was actually great. It worked really, really well. Let me see if I can show it.
Yeah, please walk me through the process of this. Because this is the
Screen.
equivalent of at the end of the mini lesson, you get the smartest kids to come up and you show their work. That is retroactively giving the rest of the bell curve an exemplar.
Yes, exactly. So at the end of our conversation, so actually what happened is, after we fixed the demographic explorer, then we were at the end and it's like, great, everything works. And I'm like, okay, not so fast. Let's reflect on this work, right?
Class is not yet dismissed.
Right. How did this go? And it's like, well, we had these problems in the middle. And I'm like, okay, why did those happen, right? And it's like, well, I guess I sort of assumed that just what you asked me for was the full scope of the goal, and then I didn't really follow good engineering processes while I was building it, right? And so we reflected on that, and then I had to distill those into a prompt for future reflection. I'm like, okay, these are our work principles. We're going to work out some work principles of what we should do. So we did basically retrospectives. Like, let's work out the work principles, and we're going to write them down, and then we're going to both use them going forward. And so now, when the second time I started, and I said, I have this blog post that is not very good, and I want to improve it. It said, it's rather than do it, right? It was like, what's our target audience, right? And what's not good about it? And like, what would good look like? And I'm like, oh, that's perfect. That's exactly the right set of questions. So let me see if I can show that conversation.
It's like the equivalent of being like, this dog right here. And you're like, oh, you're looking for a German Shepherd.
Yeah.
Not a poodle. Not a Chihuahua.
But the key is it asked me, and then it wrote a really good blog post. Okay. So here I am starting the second work session, and this time it's been instructed to read the collaborative work principles. So it's going to read them, acknowledge them. So it's reviewing these work principles. It's going to focus on the specific outcome. It's going to understand the end state.
I acknowledge that I have received and will follow our collaborative work principles. That's like placing your hand on the Bible.
Yeah, it actually worked that part of the prompt. So I was like, okay, fine.
That's cute.
Yeah, so this is basically like, I'm going to get into the right mindset and I'm going to ask the right questions. So this is where the quality is going to come from. And so now we're going to try it from here. I said, I have a blog post that tells a story of the project, but we need to rewrite it to have the correct tone and to incorporate events from the start of the project rather than starting in the middle. Now, this is not enough information, right? And so normally what will happen is your agent will go off and start to do stuff. This one is going to actually ask a lot more questions because I've defined the scope of its work to not just do what the user asks for, but to clarify what the user is asking for, to fully understand it and then do it. So it comes back and it says, I understand you want to write the blog post. Before I proceed, I need to clarify a few things. What would success look like? Can you share me the current blog post? What's the tone that you're aiming for? Which audience do you want to target it for? And then how do I get this project origin story? And then what's the end state supposed to be? And then basically from that, if you give me those pieces of information, then I will rewrite the blog post.
Very cool.
So I say, okay, here's the current blog posts. Keep it, write a new one. I want to be able to compare them. Here's my audience. It's LinkedIn. It's kind of a button-down tone. I want to tell the story in a 3-act form, right? So there's a lot more direction because it asked me for more direction. So I knew what I wanted, but I didn't tell it.
Mm-hmm.
So 3-act form, and then I kind of lay out the acts. And then in Act 2, look, for example, we need to refocus on the fundamental pipeline. This is where we basically first it gives me something amazing, then I start trying to modify it, realize it's not so well built, and then we refocus on it together and rebuild it. There's our 3 acts. And now it's like, okay, now I understand the vision. A 3-act LinkedIn narrative showcasing the journey from simple questions, sophisticated data project. And let me read the current blog post and the project log. Now the project log, to understand the chronological story, this is just a giant log, right? And so it actually cannot load the full thing because it blows up its context window. Even the context windows are broader now. So what it now does is it goes off and builds little tools to read the snippets out of the log to figure out what's happening at what point. That's sufficient to actually let it figure out what the beginning and middle and end of the project look like.
Cool.
And then it just writes the blog post. And the blog post is actually quite good. And I know it's good because I gave it to humans to read who are critical readers. And they're like, yep, this is a pretty good blog post. So as opposed to the generic AI schlop that was there before.
I think the way that I conceptualize this, if I take it to principles, is that You can't grow a good garden without really, people with the best gardens, they've spent a lot of time building up the soil. And that takes some time. It takes compost, it takes tilling, it takes putting it to bed properly in the winter. There's a lot that happens before you just put a seed in and get a plant. And I think people miss the before times when they go, well, I put the seed in and the plant sucked.
That makes a lot of sense. If you're going to do quality work, you have to first off have some idea of what quality work looks like and what it is that you're trying to do overall. And that, I think, is where, that's why a lot of people are dissatisfied with their coding agent, is that it just does what you ask for, not what you're really trying to do. And so the key to quality is to get it to ask, what are we really trying to do? And that's the groundwork that you were talking about, the preparing the garden collaboratively to figure out where are we in the process, what do we need. If you do all that upfront work, then your work product is a lot better, and it understands how to evaluate whether it's good or not, and whether it needs to keep going and improve it, or whether it's done.
Yeah, it can be a circular thing. Like, I've never had a garden before, so I just planted a bunch of seeds. And they came up and they're like, meh. And then I realized, oh, there's not enough soil in this garden. So I went and I brought in a bunch of soil, which you don't generally do like after you plant the seed.
Yep.
And so then they were happier, but then they stopped growing. And then someone said, you have to feed a garden, like it needs to be fertilized. I was like, I did not know that. I didn't know that was a thing. So then I got a whole bunch of sheep manure and I put that on it. And then I was like, oh, now the plants look happy. And this is like ass backwards of planting a garden.
This is really funny. So instead of like pulling the plants out or something, you're just like, I'm going to put more soil on, they'll deal with it. And they just grew over
and then
it.
Then compost. And this is not, you're supposed to like till that all in, but I just put a bunch of compost on top of the soil.
But
on
plants
top
are
of
capable,
the plants.
right? If you're like, well, I'll fix your problem, but not in the way you want, they're like, well, I'll work with that. Okay, this is better.
Exactly. Kind of like you kind of went back and said, okay, I'm trying to fix your problem. Here's some compost. Here's some soil. Which is kind of what I did. And the plants are definitely responding positively. I have 2 squash flowers this morning that I did not have, and a poppy, and a bunch of new pansies. It's having like a good effect. But at the same time, to next year, imagine when I actually know the order to do things.
Yeah, so I guess what we're learning here is learning to engineer with active materials, as Michael Levin, the biologist, likes to say, right? That he's talking about cells. And the point is that your cells have intelligence. Like, they're able to do stuff, right? They're not just dumb little mechanical building blocks with hard-coded rules. They're intelligent systems in their own right that used to live by themselves as single-celled organisms, and they're still capable of doing that. But now you've stuck them into a liver or whatever, and they've got a larger goal. So AI is sort of like that. It's an intelligent entity, but you've got to treat it like an intelligent entity and be like, this is the direction I want you to go in, not just do this task. And the more kind of global information you give it about like what quality looks like, what good work looks like, what you're really trying to do, the better outcome you get. And I think that's the problem with coding assistants, is that they're just geared to writing code, not really doing high quality work. And so you have to stop with the coding, just pause on the coding and say, let's talk about work and what high quality work looks like. Feed that into it. Say, here's where we agree on high quality work. And all of a sudden you get high quality work out.
I think you get better work if you gave an elementary teacher the job of creating the code, honestly, because they know how to deploy their troops.
Yeah, to reflect on and assess work, right? This is what we're doing, kids.
Yeah.
Is this good? No, this is not good. This
Here's
is
an
why
exemplar.
it's not good.
Oh, let's bring them back to the field. Let's bring them back. Let's bring them back. Agentic systems are plants more than they are building blocks or computers or anything else
they're not
inanimate.
Legos, right? Like
they're not Legos. Building block, agentic systems are more plants than Legos.
Right.
And
you have to work
be
with them in partnership.
With. Yes.
Yeah.
Work with.
Thank you.